thought I'd talk to you about my Walkman collection. It's quite a modest collection, but I think maybe quite interesting to some of you who perhaps didn't grow up with Walkmans like I did. Now, I'm not so old that I used these for that long. My main memories of Walkmans are sitting in the back seat of a car on holiday somewhere, very, very young, and falling asleep whilst listening to my personal cassette player. During my teenage years, I listened to CDs mainly. And then, I suppose my late teens, we'd already moved over to MP3s. But nonetheless, I do remember listening to Walkmans, and that is indeed why I have a Walkman collection. Because I have some nostalgia for the technology. It's not as good as I remember it being. And several reasons for that. So, basic things like you can't skip tracks easily. There were some Walkmans later on where you did have a sort of skipping facility, but most Walkmans you certainly couldn't skip tracks. Some of them you couldn't even fast forward or rewind. You could rewind, but you couldn't fast forward. Anyway, pretty basic stuff. But then more serious issues, I suppose, in terms of sound fidelity, just not that great if you didn't have something with, noise reduction was key, really. So that brings me on to this one here. This is quite a late model, so I'll talk about this one first. The problem with cassettes was that they gave off a lot of hiss, and there wasn't a way to combat that to begin with. You just had to deal with the hiss. Then, as the technology got better, they introduced something called Dolby noise reduction, and you got different bands. So you had noise reduction B, C, and maybe, I want to say S, but I could be wrong. I think S was the best. I could be wrong about that. Anyway, you certainly had different gradations of noise reduction, and B was pretty standard. It's not that great, but it was better than nothing, which makes this cassette player probably the nicest sounding of all of these. This one technically should be, but I'll tell you why. In my case, that's not true. But out of these three, for me right now, this one sounds the best, and that's largely because it has a functional noise reduction option, and also because it has a super bass and an EQ here that also functions quite well. The super bass is too bassy. You don't need that much, but it's good to be able to take control of the sound in that way. But yes, the hiss on cassettes is, to my ears today, really quite obnoxious. I had completely forgotten how bad it was, and it's not unlistenable. In a weird way, you become acclimatized, you become used to it as you're listening. So you'll start an album, and let's say you're used to listening to Spotify or whatever. There's just they work very, very hard to make sure that there's you have a completely dead sound when there should be blank space in the record, right? You don't push play, hear a lot of hiss, and then have the music fighting with that hiss. With these, you push play, there's nothing playing, but you can hear this constant noise in the background. But because it's constant and uniform, generally, not always, it used to get this banding effect where the hiss would make it's hard to describe, it's sort of a banding effect, if that makes sense. It's odd. It's when there's something wrong with your cassette player. It would sort of go in and out. The hiss would beat rhythmically. Generally speaking, though, the hiss was consistent. So you would, the longer you listened to it, the more used to it one became, and then the less noticeable it was. But not ideal, to say the least. So here is how they work. You open, I think I've put batteries in this, you open it up manually by pulling it, and then the cassettes go in here, and you close it manually, and then you have stop here, rewind, fast forward, although that, for some reason, fast forward is left here and rewind is right, and play. And you can see the mechanism functioning even when you have it open. You can see there. Sorry. I'm not sure if you can see, but that is spinning round. And you can hear it. And even when it's closed, it's not a silent device by any means. And you stop it by just pushing here. And fast forward. And rewind. And that's it. That's how it works. One of the oddly pleasing things about these is when you do play, so let me put a cassette in. I can't play any of this out loud, even though I have the ability to. I do have some speakers because of copyright reasons. And also, apologise, I don't have very many, I don't have a lot of cassettes to choose from because my collection is in storage and it was too fussy to get it out. But here are two Bob Dylan albums. This is a greatest hits, and this is a one of his earlier albums. This is a bizarre country-themed album he did. It's quite good if you like country-inspired music, which I do. I like pretty much every genre. And this is what cassettes look like, typically. And they're quite pleasant. They're coming back in now, so perhaps this isn't as interesting as I thought it might be, as more and more younger artists are deciding to release cassettes. I think mainly for their aesthetic qualities at the moment, rather than because it's a preferable way of listening, although they all have their own merits, right? So LP has its own merits, the MP3 has its own merits, and the cassette player has its own merits. They all have their own disadvantages as well. The advantage, I would say, of listening to a cassette is, first of all, you have something physical, something you can hold, which is pleasant. You are also forced to listen to it from start to finish because you can't skip tracks. Not easily, at least. And there you are. You open it like that, and then there's the cassette. And this is in really lovely condition, actually. Hasn't been played very much, clearly. And yes, typically this would hold, the sleeve inside would hold some more information about the tracks. If you were lucky, you would get lyrics in there as well. There you have it. So, what was I going to do? Oh yes, I'm all over the place today. One of the pleasant things about the cassettes are, first of all, loading it is quite a nice experience. So, they have to go in the right way around. So you don't put it in this way, because the tape here will not be read by anything down there. It needs to be read up here. This is where the tape needs to go. So you place it in the cassette player like that, and then you close it. There you go, it's in. And then you push play and you start listening. Now, the lovely thing about these is that, say you're playing music on your phone, you're playing music on no one listens to an iPod anymore really, I suppose, but let's say you were, because it's all digital, there's no feedback within the device itself to suggest anything's happening. But with the cassette, with this playing now, you really have to experience it. When you hold it in your hand, you can feel the thing working. You can feel the cogs turning, literally. And it's very pleasing. It feels slightly alive in your hand. It just feels like it's doing something rather than this dead metal object that just sort of sits there. This is actually moving. This has moving parts, and you can feel the parts moving to deliver your music to you. And for whatever reason, that does feel quite nice. Just that very gentle vibration coming off it. Ridiculous, really. Oh yes, I didn't show that there's controls on the side as well. So let me stop that. Here's what it sounds like with the tape in. Not quiet at all, but they are part of the fun. Oops. There are controls on the side. Typically you'll have your headphone jack here, you will have your volume slider here, and this selects what type of tape you're playing. So there were metal tapes that were produced, and if you were going to put a metal tape in here, you should change the switch to let the device know that you're playing a metal tape. The advantage of the metal tape was less hiss. You didn't have as much hiss with a metal tape. I don't know why. There's a reason why metal produces less hiss, but I don't know what that reason is. And then you have power input there. And this is where the batteries go. And it's just double A's, always double A's, typically 2, but there were some really lovely later Sony Walkmans that took just 1. And obviously, that's more convenient. So yeah, there's one example of quite a late stage, late in the overall life cycle of Walkmans. One example of a Walkman. Here is a much earlier example, and first of all you can immediately see, by the way, I've got a slightly purple light, I don't know if you can see that, just to give it more of an 80s feel. Here you can clearly see the advancements that were made just in the size of the devices alone. Sorry, I'm not doing a good job getting that in there. So this one, much later and much thinner compared to this early one that was made in the 80s. This is Sanyo, and these were made in, I can tell you, I think, made by Sanyo in China, but they were produced they're actually distributed. Oh, I don't know why I thought this was a company from the Philippines. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. And here's an example of no rewind. You get stop, play, and fast forward. And that's all you have. That's all you need as well, I suppose. Because it's one of the early ones, it requires 3 batteries. It's a bit of a puzzle to get them in as well. You have to stack them on each other. So you put 2 in there first and then 1 up there. And God help you if you don't put the batteries in with the ribbon at the bottom, because getting that last battery out It's a real pain. So this is the Sanyo Walkman. I think it's just a beautiful design. But it functions exactly the same as the other one. No different. You open it manually here like this. Pop the tape in and away you go. Simple, maybe not elegant design, but simple, intuitive design. Volume is all you get here. Volume and headphones, that's your lot. I even like the little dots to denote this way is loud, this way is quiet. It's just quite little decisions like that I always find quite interesting. It's a nice design. So, yes, I like... Sorry, I keep putting this off the camera. I have the camera at a strange angle, just so I can fit everything in. So I like this design very much. I think it's very nice. And then finally, this is in its own case. It's a Sony Walkman. Again, I believe this is one of their later ones, built in the 90s. This is made entirely out of metal, apart from the plastic. This is mostly made out of metal, and this is the front of the Walkman. These sell for a lot now, and I bought this because it was broken, and I foolishly thought I can fix that. And not only could I not fix it, I left it in a worse state than it was when I bought it. And it wasn't cheap. It wasn't cheap. I was quite upset about that. I think it ruined at least a month. I spent a month thinking about why did I ever think I could fix this Walkman. I did change so there's a band inside these Walkman. I would open it up, but it takes so long that it's not worth it. Maybe in another video I can show you how they work inside. But inside this Walkman, inside every Walkman, almost, because some were designed to be bandless much later on, but inside almost every Walkman there is a band that connects the two, what would you call them? The two cogs, the two moving parts here together, and that it's essentially a rubber band. Wears out after a while. Either the rubber itself will perish because it's been so long, and that's what rubber does after a while, if you just leave it for years and years and years, or it will be overused, and it will either start slipping or it will stiffen, and that will do all sorts of terrible things to your sound when listening to a Walkman. So one of the quickest and easiest fixes is to change that band inside, and it can turn what you believe to be a broken Walkman into something that's as good as new. It's a quick, easy fix, and I thought that was all that was wrong with this. But that I turned out to be wrong in this case. So it was not a waste of time, because it did help it for a moment, for a little. It helped it. It needed its band changing, but there were other problems with it as well. That when I tried to fix those, it's more to do with the circuitry. I tried to resolder parts of it, and I made it worse. It does work. It will play, but it will only play at half volume. The Dolby noise reduction doesn't seem to be working properly. This is not connected to anything. That was my fault. I snapped it off accidentally, and it's the tiniest fragment of plastic, so I can't reattach it easily. Thinking back, I think maybe some super glue might do it. But these are largely sought after today because they are very well constructed. They're made of metal, so they still look good. They last long because of the metal construction. Maybe the metal construction reduces hiss, I don't know about that, but I think mainly they sell well because they look good, they last a long time typically, and the DD stands for direct drive, which means on some of them, not the case here, they got rid of the rubber bands inside entirely, and the movement was generated exclusively by cogs inside. Sorry about that. Knocked the camera. So it was meant to increase the longevity of the Walkman, I suppose. Downside was those cogs tended to fail as well. So people had to do things to the cogs, and actually that was more fiddly than just fixing a perished rubber band. So yeah, these are sought after because they're meant to be maybe slightly longer lasting and good sound quality as well. And Sony were the best at making. They were the originals at least, or one of the originals, and they had a good reputation for making good Walkmans, but always expensive. It was expensive then, and it's expensive now. Up here we have power, headphones, volume, a battery, light, and nothing there. And here we have the Dolby noise reduction and a switch here to determine whether you're using or to set the device to read a normal tape or a metal tape. And yeah, it's a toss-up, but in terms of design between these two, which I prefer, I don't know. I love this one because it's so thick and chunky and 80s. Everything about this screams 80s to me. And I suppose in a way this looks very 90s, although this to me looks more 90s. That's more utilitarian plastic. And the slight bubbly design almost. But that really does remind me of the early 90s. Not that I was very old then, but I have fractions of memories, glimpses of memories. Yeah, but this one looks nice. Anyway, sorry, I'm trailing off here. And that's the front of it. So quite a nice design, and much nicer opening mechanism as well. You have a button here, which you slide, and it goes in. Just feels a little more, it locks it, whereas these aren't locked. They do lock when it starts playing, but they're not otherwise locked. And not a common issue with these ones is the hinge would go, so these would start flopping open. They would just sort of flop around. It's often a point of failure. Anyway, that's a very quick run through of my Walkman collection, and thank you very much for watching, and perhaps I'll show more another time.